bringing out the beast of yourself. This is Sega Masters. The year 1989 has been something of a letdown for the Master System faithful, especially after 1988 concluded on such a promising note. Today's game is sadly not going to change that trend as we're looking at Altered Beast. Indeed, a home conversion of Sega's famed arcade brawler. Though the fact that the title screen is silent should serve as the first red flag as how this port is going to turn out. Longtime Sega gamers may remember Altered Beast, a 1988 arcade beat-em-up set in the time of Greek myths, where you play the role of a deceased centurion resurrected by Zeus himself, and charged with rescuing his daughter Athena from the clutches of the evil demon god Neph. And said mission involved using your fists and feet to knock out scores of undead zombies and monsters through 5 auto-scrolling levels. While the core gameplay wasn't too different from other brawlers of the era, Altered Beast's main hook, other than being somewhat gory for its time, was its power-up system. Defeating these white Cerebuses unleashes special orbs that increase your strength as well as your body mass.
Power up.
Capturing 3 of them enables you to morph into a Beast Man, equipped with special power moves you can unleash on your foes for the remainder of the stage. Thanks to its slick presentation and visuals, the game was a smash hit in the gaming halls all over the world, and remains something of a cult favorite of Sega diehards to this day. Not too surprisingly, home conversions followed, including the one we're looking at today, which would come at a critical turning point in the Master System's North American lifespan. By the summer of 1989, the Nintendo Entertainment System was the undisputed king of the US video game market, with no signs of slowing down, and the Nintendo name had pretty much penetrated every factor of American life to boot. None of the other 8-bit consoles around at the time had even a sliver of hope of catching up, especially Sega's platform. And for those who want to point the finger squarely at Nintendo's supposed questionable practices, you need to keep in mind how Sega and Tonka weren't exactly trying their hardest on their end to give their console a fighting chance. During a summer when the NES was being blessed with some of its best remembered titles, Sega responded with a forgettable trickle of cartridges for the Master System that were disappointing, mediocre, or just plain bad, causing many to question just how dedicated Sega really was to their 8-bit platform. By this time in Japan, Sega had already cut their losses with the Master System entirely and cast their lots with their 16-bit Mega Drive console, hoping it would turn the tide in their never-ending battle against Nintendo's dominance. Many wondered if or even when Sega would make a similar decision across the Pacific, since their 8-bit console obviously wasn't getting it done in this region. Sega seemingly answered that question at the 1989 Summer Consumer Electronics Show in Chicago, when they confirmed their Mega Drive console was indeed coming to the United States that fall, though it was rebranded as the Genesis. The upcoming console and its specs received no shortage of hype in the various gaming press, as Sega all but made it clear the Genesis would be the platform they would ride with against the Nintendo juggernaut, even announcing they would handle the marketing and distribution of the console themselves. Indeed, a new beginning for Sega, if you will. And the cartridge Sega chose as the pack-in title for the Genesis' North American debut was a conversion of Altered Beast, feeling it would be the first to demonstrate how their new platform could closely replicate their arcade hits, as well as trump anything the NES was offering. It may not have aged very well in retrospect, the Genesis Altered Beast was an impressive port for its time, and we'll delve further into it at a future date. But where does that leave the Master System, you might ask? Despite the Genesis being anointed as the company's new flag bearer for the US market, Sega tried to assure the Master System faithful their 8-bit console wouldn't be cast aside, yet, even announcing a number of upcoming cartridges for it at the same CES. Oddly enough, among those titles announced was a stripped-down version of Altered Beast for the Master System, which was published in the US a few months before the Genesis debut and technically became the first home console version to appear in the Western market. It is puzzling that Sega would bother producing an 8-bit port of Altered Beast at all, given that the 16-bit version was all but ready to go for the Genesis launch. Not to mention we've seen Sega attempt to convert their flashy arcade games to the Master System in the past, especially the so-called superscalers, and the results was less than successful to say the least. You'd think Sega would have finally learned their lesson about what can and can't be done on their 8-bit console, but apparently that's not the case. Sure enough, Altered Beast is yet another instance of the Master System struggling to punch above its weight class. Nonetheless, the setup is the same as the arcade and Genesis versions. After Zeus opens the game with his usual spiel, you're set loose in each auto-scrolling stage and have to punch and kick away the demonic forces out to put you back in the grave from which you rose from. Unlike the other versions, this port is strictly a solo quest with no 2-player simultaneous mode. You start out with 3 lives and 3 bars in your health meter, though a simple cheat allows you to extend it to 5, and you will need the extra hit points. Defeating the white Cerebuses still causes the power orbs to appear, though collecting the first orb shoots you right into the super buff body with more powerful fists and feet, as well as the shrunken head. As it turns out, only 2 orbs are needed to attain your beast form in this port. Obtaining the second orb triggers your transformation into the beast man of the level, as depicted by this cutscene that's actually impressive for what it is. And you of course get to go wild with that beast form special moves for the remainder of the stage. In this case, the werewolf can throw fireballs and charge forward with a flaming arrow. Each attack is unleashed with either of the fire buttons, but given that the standard Master System gamepad only has 2 buttons instead of 3, jumping requires you to push both of them together. You also need to hold up on the D-pad while pushing the buttons if you want a high jump. It feels cumbersome at first, especially when trying to attack aerial foes, but overall the controls aren't too hard to get used to, and as we'll shortly see, it's not like you have to worry about any real platforming in this port. Eventually the stage will stop scrolling and you'll usually have to fend off an onslaught of foes for a few seconds. Then Neff himself will make his appearance. If you're still in human mode, he'll just walk away and the level continues, giving you extra time to power up. Otherwise he'll transform into one of his several monster forms for the boss battle. And the bosses from the arcade version are present, or at least some of them. These confrontations are just your usual deals with you dodge the attacks and fire your projectiles back once you get your opening. As you inflict your damage, the boss will either change color or start twitching, and the faster it shakes, the closer you are to putting him away. Line enough shots to defeat the boss and you've cleared the stage. Though Neff's disembodied head does put in a quick appearance to taunt you prior to you receiving your bonus points. Then it's off to the next level, without any of the intermissions from the other versions present, or anything to explain why you suddenly reverted back to your default form. You can easily see how much Altered Beast was cut down to even remotely work on the Master System, especially with its presentation. Granted, the Genesis translation had its share of cutbacks compared to the arcade original, but that console still had the capabilities to produce a reasonable facsimile of the coin-up, which was its original selling point, arcade action with fewer compromises. Replicating the coin-op accurately was just too much to ask for the Master System, both in terms of graphics and gameplay. The visuals don't look terrible when paused, since most of the detailed characters are recognizable, though some of them are noticeably shrunken down compared to their coin-op counterparts. But the console's processors get pushed past their limits with everything in motion, resulting in rough, jittery animation and plenty of flicker. The environments themselves don't fare much better, with washed out backgrounds and semi-solids in the foreground also lacking detail. This port of Altered Beast falters audio-wise as well, with only 3 blah music tunes to back up the action, none of which are any real substitute for the heroic and menacing tunes from the coin-op, and FM enhancement doesn't improve them very much. The sound effects add very little to the action, and only a few scratchy voice samples are present. Oddly enough, when you complete the swamp level, you find yourself immediately thrust into the temple stage, which would normally be 4th. Yes, the console's limitations force the programmers to completely cut out an entire level, as the cave where you transform into the werebear is missing, leaving just 4 stages to slog through. All the cutbacks could be overlooked if the game actually played remotely decently, but the slow, chunky movement make this conversion just about unplayable, complete with some controller-breaking levels of frustration. Your sluggish movements make it tough to get into position to defend yourself against any incoming foes, especially aerial creepies, and all the flicker leads to some issues with collision detection, meaning your blows might not actually register. If you do get hit while surrounded, you can easily find yourself hung upon baddies and juggled around, helpless to stop your health meter from being quickly depleted. Running out of lives does result in a game over, yet up to 4 continues can be accessed with a few quick cheats. And unlike the Genesis version, you even resume your crusade right at the spot where you expired at. These instant restarts are the only real hope you have to make any progress with the absurd difficulty, and it's possible to burn through multiple credits just to reach the conclusion of each stage. especially since all the slow movement and monotonous action can cause the levels to drag on for way too long. The boss battles are also something of a letdown. Granted, the monsters themselves do actually look somewhat decent, but it's just the two of you dueling it out on a plain black background. With everything in slow motion and no music present at all to add any real tension, these confrontations come off as dull and lifeless. Your rather large size and sluggish reactions can also make it difficult to dodge projectiles, much to your annoyance. Just like the arcade and Genesis versions, Altered Beast climaxes in the Underworld stage where you can transform into the ultimate beast form, the Golden Werewolf, who functions just like the normal werewolf from level 1 with the same moves, only with a shinier coat of paint. Naturally, Neff himself awaits you for the final confrontation in his rhino form at the end of the stage. Should you defeat the final boss, all you're rewarded with is a rather quick, slimmed down ending, after which you boot it back to the title screen, with no credits to view or second loop to challenge or anything. There really isn't much else to say about Altered Beast on the Master System, which is easily one of the worst games in the console's library, and also the most unnecessary. Sega probably thought they were doing their 8-bit platform a favor by translating such a high-profile game for it, even with the superior Genesis port already in the pipeline, but the Master System's limitations was just too much to overcome. As a result, we're left with a cart that's hard to look at and nearly impossible to actually play and enjoy, and obviously did nothing to turn the console's miserable summer around. Why would anyone want to settle for this hatchet job when the Genesis version can be found on just about every Sega compilation out there, and the arcade version has also been featured on a few download services as of late? All in all, Altered Beast on the Master System is best left forgotten and should never be risen from its grave. As you may have already guessed, this episode basically marks a turning point in the Master System's run in the United States. Despite Sega's promise to continue supporting their 8-bit console, it was clear that Genesis was going to be the company's main focus in the North American market going forward, with most of their resources devoted to it. And we'll see the effects of that decision bear out over the following episodes as the future began to look murky for the Master System, at least in the US.